Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, welcome back to part 2 of making a couple of custom hunting knives. In the last video, I got this knife sanded all the way up to 600 grit, and then in the time between the last video and now, I got this blade sanded up to 600 grit and gave it a stone-washed finish. A brief explanation of what stonewashing is I got this knife finished up to the same shininess as this knife, then I dunked this in a bath of ferric chloride, which is most people call it an acid, but it's actually a base, kind of like bleach. And then I put it in a container with a bunch of gravel, sprayed on a good amount of WD-40, and shook it around that container for about 10 minutes. And that gives it this nice, distressed appearance. For the shiny knife, I'm going to use this pristine bar of stainless steel. And then for the darker hunter, I'm going to use this crusty bar of wrought iron that I got from my friend Steve Schwarzer. Alrighty, so I've got both of these pieces cut through about 97% of the way through. The reason that I'm not cutting it all the way through is something a little bit new and different I'm trying. In the past, when I've had just these little 1-inch or 1.5-inch sections, it's been tough to hold on to for all the finishing processes of the shaping and then the drilling out for the tang hole and all that. So, we shall see if this makes life easier or more difficult. Now what we're going to do is put some Sharpie on the pieces so that way we can see our scribe lines so that when we go to drill it, we'll have a nice center line to go off of. Well, I just made an extraordinarily stupid mistake. I drilled the holes for both of these guards the width of the ricasso here, so the unsharpened portion of the blade, this part right here. I drilled the holes as wide as the ricasso and not the width of the tang. And so since these holes are about 1/4 of an inch wider than they need to be, that won't let me shape the guard the way it needs to be shaped. At least that's what I'm thinking right now. Maybe I'll be able to save it, and so I'm going to run with it just a little bit farther and see if I can save it. If not, it'll be back to square one. This is definitely one of those measure twice, cut once situations. This bar of stainless right here was about $30, and so I've just lost about $8 getting it cut like that and messing it up. So, use your brain, measure twice, it'll save you lots of time and money. They say that experience is the best teacher, and in some things that's true, but in cases of making mistakes like this, it's best if you can learn from other people's mistakes. So, learn from my mistakes, don't be dumb, measure twice. I've been struggling with what type of music to put on the videos, so drop a comment and tell me what you'd like to hear. Well, I've just gone and had a nice lunch, and so I've had a little bit of time to think through whether or not I can save these. And I think that I can, as long as I'm careful and make sure that when I'm rounding off the corners and shaping the guard that I don't blow through to the extra holes. The only other problem I can foresee having is when I'm fitting up the knife to the guard is whether or not I'll be able to fit it up nice and snug with these extra holes, or whether or not the whole ricasso will just start sinking down in. But if that does happen, I have a few ideas that may be able to help me. So now that I've gotten the guard fit up to the blade most of the way, there's about an 1/8 inch gap right now. I'm going to take the knife blade, which I've covered in tape and toilet paper to protect it, and I'm going to stick that in the vise, and then I'm going to press fit the guard onto the knife all the way so that there's a 0 gap, beautiful fit. We've got a bit of a problem. The guard material, the stainless steel, appears to be harder or tougher than the knife steel. Up where it contacted up in here, it started to deform the material of the blade, which is bad, bad, bad. So, let's see if we can first get rid of those scratches or dents, and then see if I can soften the steel. I decided to not soften the guard. With my limited knowledge of stainless steel, I decided that it could actually do more harm than good, because sometimes with stainlesses, if you heat them up, they can harden. Well, I've spent about 2 hours getting this thing fit up because of the two materials that I'm working with, the soft part of the ricasso and the hard bolster material, or guard material. It's just fighting me an awful lot, and I gotta get this done in a few days. So now what we're gonna do is head on over to the sander and get this thing all shaped up. Well, now I've made two major mistakes with this guard. The first one was drilling too many holes in the guard, and now the second one is when I ground the shoulders for the guard to fit up against on the blade, I ground them not 90 degrees to the blade, so now the guard is kicked up like this. So I get to undo all that fit up work that I just did, a whole afternoon's worth, and get it to where it's 90 degrees or maybe down a little bit this way to the blade. Now that I've got my trusty handy-dandy file guide on there, I can take this over to the sander and grind it. And what this is just a steel piece with a couple of carbide faces on it, and the carbide won't get scratched by the abrasives of the sander or by files or anything else like that. So it'll give me nice, flat, even shoulders. Alrighty, so that fit up took way less time than before, only about 15 to 20 minutes, and now it is looking primo. I'm going to go ahead and get the blade sanded back up to 600 grit, shape the guard a little bit more, and then get that sanded up to a 400 grit, hand sanded finish as well. So since I messed up the finish on the ricasso while I was fitting up the guard, I decided to regrind the clips of the knife. The right side wasn't perfectly symmetrical with the left, and when I reground the right side, I made it a little bit more unsymmetrical with the left side in a different part, so I'm just going to go ahead and regrind both of those. I wasn't able to get a perfect fit up on the guard, so I decided to solder it on. What you do is you heat up the tang and then put your solder up on the top of the guard, and the heat will suck it down through and give you 0 gaps. Next, I whipped up a quick brass chisel. Since the brass is softer than the steel in the blade and softer than the guard, you can chisel away the solder without affecting your finishes. The material I'm going to be using for the handle of this guy is some premium African blackwood from Kieran's Koa. It's got some nice figure to it, some nice sheen and chatoyance. When you're drilling out the holes for a hidden tang, it's super important that you peck drill down and up, otherwise you'll crack your material. After getting most of the material drilled out, I like to use my Black Dragon Forge broach and saw out the rest of the material. Now I'm doing what's called a burn-in. You heat up the tang to a dull red and then push your block on, and it gets you a nice tight fit. I decided to do a Damascus guard for one knife and a Damascus spacer for the other, but they were too hard as they were, so I had to throw them in the forge to soften them. One neat thing about traveling and making knives is that each knife I make usually travels around 3 states. Now that I've got the rough shape of the handle and all the rough contours and facets fixed in there, I'm going to start polishing it up all the way up to 1000 grit. I've got this spacer here all the way up to pretty close to a mirror polish, so it's time to etch that and then polish the guard and polish the handle. I decided I didn't like the shiny finish of the blade, so I decided to gun glue it and etch it a little bit. The last step is to glue up the knife using some West Systems Super Epoxy. I've gotten these knives 99% of the way done, but because of awful time management, because last week I had a bladesmithing class that I took, I wasn't able to video the finishing process or the sheath making for either of these. But the last step is to go ahead and trim up the edges on this one, put a coat of shiny stuff on both the sheaths, and then put a last coat of wax on this handle. I start off sharpening using a 120 grit belt, then I go up to 320. I use the slack of the belt to give a nice strong edge, then I move up to whetstones to take off that final burr. Alrighty, so now that I got both the knives all sharpened up, it's time to see if they will cut. And I think they will. Thank you so much for watching today's video. With each of the knives I make, I try to make each one better than the knife before it, and then with these knives in particular, I wanted to make them just as phenomenal as I possibly could, because this coming summer, I'm going to be testing for my Journeyman Smith rating. If you want to know what that is, and you'd like to see me make the knives for it, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hopefully in the very near future, I'm going to be making this big old fancy chopper for the first part of my test, which is the performance test. Again, if you want to know what that is, make sure to subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.